We have seen many revolutions, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the rise and fall of communism, and the storming of the Bastille. Is Donald Trump's inauguration another one, a paleo-Western revolution? Our interviewee, our guest, believes that's the case. Koos Malan, Professor Koos Malan, is a legal scholar and political analyst. Koos says Trump's return to power is not just a change in leadership, but a revolution, a cultural ideological upheaval that challenges progressive dominance. Koos, what is the Paleo-Western revolution and how is it different to other revolutions that we've experienced in history?
Donald, that's a massive question. And I've caused the question because I wrote an article which led also to this interview. Just before I try to answer you, thank you very much for the kind invitation. I sincerely appreciate that. The Paleo-Western revolution is a revolution within Western civilization. Western civilization that has been under increasing pressure over the past decades, as a matter of fact. One can actually take it back to the period immediately after the Second World War. But this pressure that has been exerted upon Western civilization has reached a zenith in the past 5, 10, 15 years, especially as a result of what you've mentioned in your question, namely the extreme progressive onslaught on what is generally viewed as the basis, the fundamental tenets of Western civilization. So, in order to answer your question, one has to break the term Paleo-Western up into its two elements, Western and Paleo. Now, Western civilization goes back a very, very long way. In a sense, following various scholars of history, such as Arnold Toynbee, as well as Samuel P. Huntington, Western civilization is a successor civilization. Its roots goes back to ancient times, and specifically three roots. Christian religion, the first one, Christian faith. Second one, the Greek, more specifically the Athenian passion for learning, philosophy, wisdom, and lastly, the Roman passion for law, including public law and statecraft. Those are the ancient roots. To that, one should add the very important thing, which is sometimes forgotten, but which a number of scholars lately have gone out of their way of emphasizing, is what you have found among the Germanic tribes, and which eventually in the period, in the medieval period, as well as the early modern period and in the modern period, has given rise to the tremendous sense of experimentation, the tremendous sense of new scientific findings, the sense of discovering and also various victories of Western civilization over the entire world. Many people would regard that, would condemn that, as a matter of fact, as a form of hyper-aggression. Now, a certain amount of sound aggression, as a matter of fact, is a prerequisite for any civilization, any community, and as a matter of fact, for any individual person. But what has happened in the West is that energy, that resourcefulness, that sense of experimentation has reached a zenith, specifically among the Western European tribes and eventually the Western European nations, and that has formed, together with the first three bases that I've mentioned, that together has constituted Western civilization and has led to, and many people will say, well, that's an outrageous statement to make, but I would say that has led to Western civilization actually performing and achieving its position in world history as the most potent and the most successful civilization among all civilizations. Not to say that other civilization has not also reached tremendous heights, but that is the reason why Western civilization has reached the tremendous heights on a very broad variety, a very broad spectrum of human activity. Now, recently, one can actually take it back to the first revolution that I've mentioned in the article that I've written and which we have discussed, namely the French Revolution. Since that time, but as I've said, especially since the end of World War II and then the last 15 to 20 years, Western civilization has come under tremendous pressure. Western civilization and all the sectors, all the outliers of Western civilization, wherever Western civilization might have been, be it in North America, specifically the United States, be it in Western Europe, which was the initial cradle of Western civilization, or be it in other spots where you had footprints of Western civilization, such as Australasia, specifically Australia, and then obviously also South Africa, in which there is clearly also a particular footprint of Western civilization. In all these areas, Western civilization has come under tremendous pressure. All the founding elements of Western civilization has been accused of together actually having constituted a tremendous form of sin. As a matter of fact, the most grievous collective sin that any human grouping has ever committed, as a result of which it was actually on account of a variety of ideologies required of Western civilization to liquidate itself. And perhaps later on we can focus upon some of these ideologies which have placed this pressure upon Western civilization. And I think that what has happened in the past couple of years, a very strong reaction has started to develop in the United States, specifically in the United States, which no question at the moment is the focal point of Western civilization. Culturally, intellectually, ideologically, there was a tremendous amount of thinking, intellectual activity in journals, in institutions, in a wide variety of groupings in the United States and elsewhere in the Western world, which has built resistance against these ideologies that have been enlisted against Western civilization. Alternatives have been developed, and it's these alternatives which eventually, I think, have given rise to what I've called the Paleo-Western revolution, in terms of which the Paleos, that is the initial origins, the initial roots of Western civilization, all four that I've mentioned, are actually rediscovered, and where instead of accepting and cherishing the leftist, or then specifically the so-called progressive accusation against Western civilization, of internalizing all those accusations, instead of doing that, actually saying, no, what Western civilization has achieved through the ages, through aggression amongst others, was in fact also the highest form of human achievement ever achieved, and that is in fact once again embraced. This has come out in the United States very strongly. I think one also notices that all over the world where there are Western footprints, a strong Western presence. Donald Trump is not this revolution. He does not constitute this revolution. In all the revolutions, and we can speak a little bit later about that, you had certain upheavals in terms of change of government and so on, but that in itself never constituted the actual revolutions. In the case of Donald Trump also, that didn't constitute a revolution. That was and still is obviously a very dramatic event that is taking place, as a result of which one can say that Trump and the change of government that has taken place and is still taking place in the United States, that was the catalyst. That was the catalyst which allows the broader revolution, and we'll have to see how it's playing out. The broader revolution, which to my mind is taking place here, that has given rise to and has paved the way for the revolution really to come to the fore and been given effect to. So yes, that's not the revolution itself, but that is the catalyst, as I've said.
Interesting. Let me ask a few questions that an average viewer might ask. Paleo, meaning white?
No, sorry, I didn't say it expressly enough. Paleo means original or primordial. So that's the essential roots of Western civilization, the four that I've mentioned. You can't conceive of Western civilization without those four roots. All right, just specifically also addressing the question of whites. Obviously, you can't conceive of Western civilization without whites. It's white people. But Western civilization is not a racial matter, not at all. And precisely for that reason, through history, especially the past, well, since the beginnings of, call it modern day, which goes back already a couple of 100 years, there have always been, and there are still, non-white people who associate with the West and who are part and parcel of the West. I can mention a large number of names eventually to corroborate the point. But no, it is certainly, as we're sitting here, still a mainly white thing in the sense of the people participating in that. But a racial thing, it is certainly not.
To expand on your point, aggressiveness being one of the main beneficiaries or what helped Western civilization. Just to help our viewers understand, are you saying the Africans or Americans or whatever, the natives of that, were they not aggressive? Or,
That's a very interesting thing. I'm actually glad that you answered the question and give me the opportunity to elaborate a little bit on that. If one reads the massive volume of William McNeill, it's a book that I'm very fond of, The Rise of the West. One of the things that came out in that book very strongly, I actually marked it. I read a lot of history. One of the things that is specifically almost an outstanding characteristic of Western civilization, of Western man, which most certainly include Western women, is resourcefulness, originality, a sense of experimentation. I mean, look at the history of Enlightenment, or even before Enlightenment. Look at the history of the discoveries of the world. Surely that was, to a certain extent, also something that was undertaken by Chinese people in the 15th century. But mainly, it was a Western thing, conducted by Portuguese, Spanish, later on French, Brits, specifically English, Dutchmen, and so on and so forth. And the way in which that was conducted, amongst others, was indeed aggressive, extremely aggressive. There's no question about that. If one looks at the history of the United States, most certainly, well, not only the United States, but also Central America, South America, and so on, a tremendous harm has befallen the indigenous people of those continents and also many places elsewhere, but specifically in the Americas, for a variety of reasons, which attests to the high activity, the tremendous levels of energy, and together with that, the high levels of also of aggression. It is almost an aggression which is not predetermined. It's not premeditated. It's almost an aggression which is part and parcel of the inherent characteristic, personality, temperament of Western man, at least up to a specific point. I've read some comments by anti-Western people. There's one specific specific one that I'm thinking about now. Unfortunately, for the moment, I forgot the name of the author of that. It was a lady who said, well, you can look at all the achievements of Western civilization in the world of literature, in the world of music, in the world of scientific discovery, in the world of politics, music, and so on and so forth. Music, culture, and so on. And your judgment would be, well, these are all wonderful achievements, but the aggression that was committed by the West, for example, through discovery, so-called discovery from a Western point of view, colonization, slavery, which lately is certainly not only a Western phenomenon, but in the last, because Muslim peoples were also responsible for that, Chinese and
the
so on
Ottoman
and so
Empire.
forth. Sorry?
The Ottoman Empire.
The Ottoman Empire, one can go into details as far as that is concerned. Very interesting phenomenon, actually, where the young Western boys were actually captured in the Balkan and incorporated into the army of the Sultan. But okay, leave that aside. But it may be said that that slavery was actually brought to its zenith, its most extreme consequences by Western civilization. And together with a number of other things, for that reason, the West was amongst if you compare it with other civilizations, other communities, perhaps the most energetic, and together with that also the most aggressive, possibly being responsible for the highest achievements, but at the same time,
the most deaths,
the most destruction, and so on. And if I may just briefly comment on that, I think that's a function of the human condition. If a particular community does possess a tremendous amount of energy, then that energy will be channelized in various directions. Some very positive and others negative. And then also something else, and some people might blame me of saying so. In order to achieve things, you clash with other peoples. This is what happened in history. This is what happened not only in Western history, that is what happened in history. And in those clashes, you must have sufficient strategic acumen in order to meet the challenges that come your way, in order to actually overcome it. Okay? And in that process, you might say, well, it might be very vicious, there might be a tremendous amount of bloodshed, and so on. But going through the entire history, who are the military heroes? Certainly not those guys that have lost. It has always been the guys who have been very astute generals, very astute military officers, very astute soldiers, who in the process of carrying out their duties from their point of view for their people have, amongst other things, committed a lot of military victories, and together with that also vicious deeds. So in the process of giving effect to energy, you're confronted with a mixed bag. A lot of things are very positive. A lot of things are certainly negative. And I think, and that is without delving into theology or whatever, but that's part of the human condition. And part of the human condition is we are sinful. You don't have to be...
Except me.
Except you. Well, obviously. And we simply have to accept that. The main thing regarding one's sinful condition, I think, are two things, coming to think of it. And the one is firstly, you have to have an understanding of your sinful deeds, of things that have gone wrong. And you must try to rectify it, okay? Because we're also rational, we're also moral, okay? That's the first thing. But when trying to rectify you mustn't rectify in such a way that you eventually commit suicide. And by the way, I think that is one of the problems in the West, especially after 1945. The second thing is this. In Christian religion, and one does not have to be a theologian, and that's the very last thing I am, but to understand that if forgiveness is to be given, that forgiveness is to be given by, in the first instance, by the Almighty God, not somebody else, not some kind of far leftist, progressive collective of human beings before you have to kneel in order to bend the knee, for example, and ask for forgiveness. No, because that is not a question of forgiveness. That is prostrating yourself before other human beings, which might be an enemy which require you to liquidate yourself. And this is one of the things that has in fact happened in the last decades as a result of this progressive woke tendency that we have had in the Western world, specifically in the United States, but also in South Africa. That has nothing to do with forgiveness. That is actually prostrating yourself before an enemy and liquidating yourself.
Yeah, and the belief that you can be saved by doing that.
Saved by doing that.
Not necessarily that you agree what they're saying, just, okay, I just want to be left alone or whatever.
And then, when that happens, you're precisely not going to be left alone. Yeah. Okay? Because this is nothing to do with actual forgiveness. This is a political struggle. That's one of the stratagems of your opposition, more specifically your enemy, to get you as far as to actually commit suicide. Yeah. And I mean, from a political point of view at least, the most heinous thing that you can think of is to spare your enemy the struggle against you by killing yourself.
Yeah, I think it's Sun Tzu. I'm paraphrasing, but he said that the best way to achieve victory is making your enemy concede defeat without you ever actually battling him. I mean, I'm paraphrasing it. He said it way better than I did, but sort of the idea is to make him commit suicide without you actually fighting him.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is, it's good that you've referred to that, and to the extent that I know something about Sun Tzu, I think your paraphrase is more or less correct. And this is precisely what we've witnessed in the period, in the last, say, 15, 20 years. And the Paleo-Western Revolution is precisely a response to that. But not only a reaction to that, it's not only reactionary, it is reconstituting. In that it goes back to the very roots of Western civilization. Also at the same time, utilizing the benefits of previous revolutions. Things that at first glance might seem to be negative, but actually utilizing that, putting that to your use in order to achieve this Paleo-Western revolution, and to see to it that it is in fact eventually durable. Because one of the consequences of a revolution, in contrast with a mere change of government, is specifically its durability. Yeah. And I think perhaps we can go into some of the previous revolutions in order to cast light on that.
Just to summarize, a best expression perhaps would be, in the darkness shines the brightest light. So for a Winston Churchill, you had to have Hitler. That's sort of to get an idea of Western civilization. They aim so high that you had these extremes like a Hitler, that obviously was a bad guy. But for Hitler, you got Winston Churchill, which was...
I just want to make a comment about you mentioned Hitler here. What you've had through history is Western civilization on many occasions having gone wrong, having gone astray. And the Hitler phenomenon, National Socialism, was specifically one such example. Extreme liberalism is one such example. but Hitler is another one. When you indulge in the opposite of democracy, because democracy is a Western achievement.
Yeah.
When you indulge in the opposite of individual liberties, because that's also a specifically Western achievement, within reason, I'm going to say something about that just now. When you indulge in interstate and specifically inter-nation, intercommunal war, in the way in which National Socialism has done, then what you're indulging in, what you're engaging in, is an intra-Western civil war. That is what the Second World War eventually, it was not only that, surely not, it was also waged in many other places in the Pacific and so on. But National Socialism, and to mention Hitler specifically, was a core example and also a crude example of Western civilization having gone wrong. And the second example, as I've said, is extreme liberalism, because that eventually is also an assault on Western civilization. But okay, just back to your point. One of the things about Western civilization is that one of its characteristics, one of its salient characteristics, I would say, you can't conceive of Western civilization without that, is that it is a constitutional civilization. And this is nothing to do with constitutional law. I'm not bringing in my own expertise as far as that I'm a constitutional jurist in this. But the constitutional idea, the very idea of constitutionalism, is based upon the truism that there are a variety of centers of power, authority, influence, property, and so on and so forth. And that these various centers are all regarded as legitimate, all regarded as part and parcel of a broader civilization, exercising checks and balances against each other, so as to have a struggle, yes, within the civilization, but within the in terms of the tenets, the rules, the principles, the norms in that particular civilization. Precisely for that reason, you had various political institutions, states, kingdoms, republics, and so on, all through medieval times and later on. But you had the church, and later on a variety of churches. You had academia. You had the business sector and various businesses and business organizations, Hansa League, for example, and so on and so forth. You have the professions, and you have organized civil society, which are all part and parcel of the entire civilization, the entire order, keeping each other in balance. This is perhaps one of the core characteristics of Western civilization. And why is that? It's an interesting thing also, why is that? It's precisely because Western civilization has a variety of roots. The roots in Christianity, the roots in Athens, the root in Rome, and the root in the achievements of Germanic peoples later on. So in other words, right from the start, from the very beginnings of Western civilization, you had these various roots within reason actually competing with each other and keeping each other intact. What's happened with Hitler, on the one hand, is that those checks and balances within the broader civilization that have been jilted, that has been thrown away. So some right-wing people, some very right-wing people would say, and I heard the argument, fortunately not recently, would say, well, National Socialism was a kind of a zenith, a kind of a high point of Western civilization. Precisely not so. It was the opposite of that. It was Western civilization going astray. for precisely the same reason, doctrinal liberalism also. We should discuss that. But I'm glad you've asked the question. I think I've wandered from the point, but perhaps some important points have been made.
Doctrinal liberalism would be French Revolution that also went astray.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, if one goes into the French Revolution, I think eventually there are the following important principles that have come out of that. In the first instance, a kind of a doctrinal subscribing to the idea of equality, that all human beings are essentially equal. They are essentially the same.
Sounds similar to what we have now.
Absolutely, absolutely. In that sense, what we currently have in South Africa is a form of height point of extreme liberalism, combined obviously with, I think, also a height point, a zenith of actually leftist thinking of Bolshevism. We have a form of Bolshevism in South Africa. That's what we have. Fortunately, it has not given rise to a tremendous amount of state violence, and I think it won't eventually. But the thinking is essentially communist thinking. I mean, we have seen now that the South African government, the ANC specifically, has associated themselves with the so-called Progressive International. I don't know if you've seen that. That's now a new organization that has been formed in Europe. I see the South African government is also now part of it, together with a number of other states such as obviously Cuba, Bolivia, Venezuela.
North Korea? Perhaps not. North Korea is perhaps too extreme.
I think they are too isolated.
Yeah.
They don't know as yet about this.
Yeah.
But this is just an indication of what you have in South Africa. South Africa is at the same time, even though the two sometimes clash, a manifestation of extreme subscribing to the idea of equality, and at the same time a form of communism.
Yeah.
But okay, firstly, the idea of equality, absolute equality. So precisely for that reason, to use a contemporary example, so allow people to come to Europe, open the doors for people to come into Europe from wherever, because in terms of the extreme liberal assumption, all people are essentially the same. There's a sameness of people. So if Muslims come into Europe, don't worry, we're essentially the same. Soon they will realize that they are actually not Muslims, they're actually just only people, just like us, we're exactly the same. They will throw away their culture, nothing will come of it, because finally we are one, finally we're equal. That's the one thing. And that is obviously very inimical towards any civilization. It's inimical towards any community. It's inimical to any individual, because individuality, sound individuality, healthy individuality, is also premised on the basis that you're different from other people. The fact that you belong to a community, a variety of communities. I belong to a family which are different from other families.
Yeah.
And I prefer my own family, my own children, and so on and so forth. Nothing wrong with that sound. I'm an Afrikaner, not in a state of animosity towards people not being Afrikaners, but I cherish the fact that I'm an Afrikaner and I want to protect that. That has also enabled me to be what I am. I draw my membership from being from the Afrikaner nation, Afrikaner volk, as we say in Afrikaans. That also informs my own identity, and the same with your membership of your civilization. So, in other words, if you deny your membership from the various communities to which you belong, you actually, in the final analysis, deny yourself and deny your civilization. And leftists, extreme leftists, the so-called progressives, in the final analysis, deny any form of sound identity, any form of community, any form of difference. on the basis of a doctrinal insistence that everyone is essentially equal, everyone is essentially the same. That's the one thing. The other thing is, I cherish, like you, I don't know you that well, but I know that you cherish individual freedom. I know you well enough to know that for certain.
Too much.
Too much. So do I. Much of the work that I've done in the academic field was as a result of giving expression to my own thinking. Okay, informed by the communities to which I belong. But I cherish and I will protect and I will fight for that freedom of expression. Okay? But your freedom of expression may not exceed certain boundaries.
Yeah.
There are certain boundaries, and I can mention two of them. Firstly, it cannot exceed boundaries which allow you to invade upon the freedom excessively of freedom of others, whatever kind of freedom.
To give a practical example, someone can't just step in here now and start talking amongst us. You'd be evading our
Precisely.
freedom of speech.
Precisely.
I mean, I'm giving a layman's, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Good example. And the second example is, I cannot deny the fact that I'm a man. It's a given fact. It's physical. And I cannot deny the fact that I'm sexually attractive towards women. I cannot suddenly decide, neither that I ever considered that I want to wake up tomorrow and being a woman or something in between. That is, to use strong words, rubbish. But in terms of liberal progressivism, your individual freedom should also allow for that kind of freedom, a freedom which is inherently an impossibility. And what is interesting is that in the United States specifically, with woke ideology, this individual freedom has become so potent that the previous candidate of the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, has bought into that. So it's become mainstream politics, mainstream ideology, as a result of which there was really a need for an unequivocal opposition against that, even though the unequivocal opposition was eventually led, at least in the forefront, by a very robust, rumbustious person like Trump. The rumbustious Trump was the guy who perhaps never thought in detail about these things. He's not a theoretical person. He's not a philosopher. He's not a historian. But in terms of his instinct, he knows, to the same extent that all rational people should know about that this is rubbish. It's nonsense. Your right to freedom of expression and your ability to make free choices can never go that far. So what has happened is that a line has been drawn against these excessive insistence of equality and excessive insistence on individual liberty, which simply cannot go that far.
Yeah. Perhaps to expand on that, I think you're 100% correct, and I think you're perhaps describing the average radical, especially on the left, the woke. I think also what's happening here, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion, it's also a difference in terms of how a lot of people take in information. So it's a war between legacy media and podcasting world. Legacy media giving you a picture of everything is actually okay. Like the stupid example, certain parties would say, don't worry about what's going on in the Western Cape. We don't have potholes or whatever. Everything's going okay. Then you get people like Fadil Adams would say, some of these townships are war zones. More people are dying here. So it's not even relevant who's right. It's a difference of information. And what happens then is there's a sense of urgency, difference of urgency. When there's urgency, people think in terms of first. Western Cape first, or Afrikaners first, or Khoi first, or colored first, or United States first, America first. So that's one of the, there's a difference in terms of what's going on the ground. In terms, Donald Trump famously said, "The American dream is dead." And Hillary Clinton criticized him, saying, "No, what's this rubbish? We're still going great," and da-da-da. But it's that difference in how they see the reality on the ground that leads to what they eventually say. So then Donald Trump says, "American dream is dead, so we need to start using tariffs. We need to start protecting the United States." Hillary Clinton says, "No, we're fine. We can save the world. We're fine over here. Because we're fine over here, we can also save the world." So I 100% agree with you, but it's also like a contrast in terms of some elite have become disconnected with what's going on the ground.
Yeah.
And because of that, they don't see the issue. Like, what are you moaning about? Everything's okay. Like, I mean, we can save the world. Open up the borders. Everyone can come to Cape Town. I mean, what are you moaning about? Everything's okay.
Yes, I think it's very important to actually emphasize that point. I'm glad that you actually raised it. You find among leftists a tendency to be very abstract. In contrast to non-leftist people, civilizationalists, you can also call it conservatives, not to be very concrete.
Yeah.
A typical lefty would say, "I'm so concerned about the fate of people somewhere in East Africa, suffering from hunger."
Yeah.
And then, since he or she or it is concerned about such people, you don't have to do anything because they are far away. They never look you into the eye. In contrast to you and me and whoever who would say, "Well, I walk down the street and I see here's a person who suffers, and you give the person a few rand or you give him food or whatever." That's the difference between your common human being, okay, in contrast to your neighbor. In Afrikaans, die naaste.
Yeah.
The person that you come across with, that you come across, you help that person, okay? So that's the one point that I would like to make first in response to what you've said. Then what has happened? In a sense, there was a conspiracy against common sense. And it has happened in academia at our universities. I shouldn't say our. It used to be our universities. At the universities, in academia, where especially in departments such as philosophy, politics, sociology, psychology, in the human sciences broadly, an extreme amount of abstraction has developed. Building all kinds of theories, which are all common in the sense that they are equally divorced from actual reality. However, very prescriptive and looking down on the common people with common sense. It's the interesting thing about common sense. It's the common people, but it's also common sense. Looking down upon them, as Hillary Clinton would have said, they're deplorables.
Yeah.
Okay? Now fine, then I'm a deplorable. But fortunately I have a little bit of common sense. Knowing full well that what some, and I'm going to use that word, that what some stupid political science professor at the University of Stellenbosch preaches is nonsense.
Yeah. Sounds very specific.
Yeah, it is. I'm thinking about a particular woman. I really think it's stupid. Because if you are so divorced from reality that you simply do thumb sucking from your brain, which is no longer filled with actually observations that you have made, what is that other than stupidity? So, in a sense, this is a conspiracy of stupidity, which shares the fact, all of them, that they are divorced from reality, divorced from bad things, okay? Bad things that you must be confronted with bad things. And you must be confronted with that because that's the prerequisite of addressing the problems. If you don't see it, you will never address it. You will be overwhelmed by that problem. It's just going to get more serious and more serious and more serious. And eventually it will overwhelm you. You will die as a result of that. So this is the wonderful thing about, and I mean, I don't have to tell you about it, you know way more than I do about it. This is what happened with the new media, with the tremendous emergence of the new media, which has democratized our social structure, which has also democratized the way in which debate is taking place. I need no longer knock upon the door of some legacy media, and actually we should get another word to describe it, a more derogatory word, I should say.
Fake news.
Fake news, one of the good things, like Trump said, yeah, which is not necessarily in the first instance fake news, but it's a proxy of something which is just fake, which is just distant from reality. Now, what has happened also in the United States, and as I've said, you will know much better than I do, but previously, possibly, podcasters were people who were irresponsible. So was the general view might have been like that. In contrast to people in the legacy media who are the responsible people, the responsible journalists, they check their facts and so on. I checked. A few weeks ago, I started writing an article which will most probably be published in the next day or two about Russian-American relations from a real political point of view. But let's leave the article aside. Then I looked into what South African journalists, specifically senior journalists, say about that. They would say Putin is mad. They would say Trump is mad. And so they would carry on. Fascist, Nazi, racist. What is that? Is that journalism? That's just another way to say, I don't like him. That's all. It's just a proxy for saying, I don't like him. But they've run out of vocabulary. You know, it's just repeating that over and over again. So what has happened is that the so-called alternative media, and one should consider whether it's still appropriate to speak of the alternative media. Is it just other media? Is it just another medium? Okay? Because I think you get as many irresponsible people now in the so-called alternative media as in the so-called mainstream media, and as many responsible journalists and so on, people like you, in doing podcasts and so on, and possibly the percentage of responsible people in the field of the alternative media might be higher. And this, as we've seen in the United States in the past election, has played a decisive role actually in the outcome of the election. Was it not for that, the turnout of the election would have been otherwise. I saw figures saying that of the mainstream media, 85% of the comments and so on that were made in mainstream media was positive towards Harris, actually making propaganda for Harris, in contrast to only 15% for Trump. And if I can just lastly mention something about that, I see one of the things that is being said, apart from the Republican Party and Trump and the conservative parties in Europe and so on, apart from that, them being racist, fascist, and so on and so forth, which most certainly they are not. But apart from that, they are also undemocratic. Now, that is nonsense.
Irony. The irony. I mean, I think it was, what's his name, J.D. Vance, making a speech in Munich talking about we need to protect freedom of speech. And people literally asked, I think it was Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, okay, but isn't that what the Nazis did? They used freedom of speech to further their agenda.
Yes.
It's the opposite of what the Nazis did.
Exactly. Now look what the mainstream media, and that's where your question began. Look what the mainstream media and these so-called mainstream commentators, look what they're doing. Look what those outlets are doing. They tend very strongly to exclude. In the American election, they also excluded Now, if you are a mainstream media and if millions and billions of dollars are behind you in order to protect you, to bolster you, then certainly it's not only a private venture anymore. Then certainly you also have a public duty. And the public duty is to serve community.
Yeah.
And in that way to discharge your democratic responsibilities. Have they done so? No. They've precisely completely compromised it, to put it mildly. So the accusation of being going against democracy, of forfeiting democracy, that accusation is actually at the door of the mainstream media. So it's fortunately, we have the alternative media, the podcasters, and so on and so forth, which has actually contributed towards the democratization and which in a sense is making a huge contribution towards, in a sense, also this paleo-Western revolution that I think is in fact taking place.
Okay, so according to you, Donald Trump now changes everything. He's the catalyst for this paleo-Western revolution really taking shape and taking a stand against this liberal world order. What do you see now for the future? What's now the beginning of new change?
Yeah, that is a difficult question to me, but certainly not an unfair question. In a sense, claiming that a revolution takes place is, and also in this case then specifically the paleo-Western revolution, is a startling claim to make, because in a sense I pretend to look into the future. When the French Revolution took place, people in that revolution, people at that time, didn't know it was a revolution. What they saw is the Bastille was stormed. Later on, well, there was a massive upheaval politically. But they didn't notice already at that time that this also actually ushered in a change in common sense, a change in the common sense that was eventually, looking back, going to be in the West there for 100, 150, 200 years. So, in other words, I'm actually making a forecast. That's one of the reasons why this is difficult. All right? I think what is going to happen is that this is going to be a thorough process, a profound process. Much of what is happening in politics is going to change. There's going to be a change in the relationship between the great powers. But let's leave that aside. Let's say something more about that for a few sentences. Previously, American foreign policy, especially the so-called new-con foreign policy, was aimed at exporting liberalism, exporting liberal democracy all over the world, and engaging in wars in order to achieve that. So that was typically something that was taking place in pursuance of far leftist liberal thinking. That has now come to an end. We've already seen that. But the most important thing is what is going to happen in the United States, what is going to happen in South Africa, what is going to happen in Western Europe, and so on and so forth. Well, firstly, I think this is going to expand. The kind of political upheaval that we've noticed on the 5th of November last year, I think that's going to expand. I think it's going to expand all over Western Europe. There will be a lot of resistance, but I think eventually it will expand to places. It has already taken place in some countries, for example, Hungary, Poland, but I think it will expand to the larger Western European states, such as Germany, even though there's a lot of resistance, France, Spain, and eventually also England. I think that, for starters, is going to take place. It's going to take some years, but eventually it will take place. But then, more importantly, and that's where the test for a revolution actually comes in is how would people think? And that brings us to the province of education, because it's mainly in education that the thinking world of people are being conditioned. Up to now, and as I've said already on a couple of occasions, we have this liberalism being inculcated over a period of many years, especially over the last 20 years or so. I think there's going to be a massive turnaround as far as that is concerned. Western, in all over where there's a Western footprint, US, South Africa, Europe, and so on, there will be a reconsideration of Western history. Instead of cherishing almost the capacity, the identity of the collective criminal, I think that will be thrown off. I think Western people would again view their history increasingly in a more positive way, cherishing their own achievements, acknowledging the downsides, but cherishing their own achievements, which is not currently happening. I think this is going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's going to be a long process. In all over education, in university education, in school education, all over, I think it is going to be something which will happen in history departments and in history as a subject in schools and so on, but eventually all over. I think all over. Then secondly, I think there will be a complete reconsideration of how do we view communities. Communities will be cherished. We will again have to learn to cherish communities. A very specific thing about progressivism is to say there's only one entity in society. Well, actually there is no society. There's only one global world. It's only one entity, and that's the individual. Yeah. Ironically, but it's fine. The individual should be there. But the individual, as I've said a while ago, the individual is always part of a variety of communities. And if an individual is not part of that, you don't have a strengthened individual, you have a weakened individual. The true story about progressivism is not the individual, is the weak individual who has no protection of any communities, either a cultural community, religious community, a family, nothing around him. So I think what we will see in the next years, in the next decades, is cherishing the individual within the background, ensconced in the community. So I think we will once again start to cherish our communities and build our communities, beginning with families. Seeing it in the first instance as virtuous, giving effect to it, and having a new way of thinking in terms of which that is actually fed. That is, there's nutrition for that. I think that's going to happen. And then secondly, that also implies a new relationship between various communities. For example, cultural communities. Instead of denying that there is something like a cultural community and claiming, as progressivism does, that there's only the individual in one big world, we will say no. We draw boundaries. We do draw boundaries, but we draw boundaries not in order to lead to conflict. We're doing it for precisely two other reasons. Firstly, to protect the integrity of the community, which is a prerequisite also for the strengthened individual in the first place, and to promote sound relations among various communities. So instead of denying communities and eventually calling upon each and every one of them to liquidate themselves, which is in the final analysis an excessively extreme and aggressive thing to do. We will rather say, no, we recognize all those communities, the differences between them and so on, and the fact that they together provide towards the ecosystem of humanity. I think that's the way that we're going to follow. And Western civilization finds its place within that.
You use the term, to tie it all together, you use the term aggressive nature to refer back to the, for example, the Germanic tribes or whatever. Another would say competitive nature. And it's that competitiveness that brings out the strong man or woman.
Yeah.
And that's what's lacking now today, is this one, we're all the same. It's actually, to a certain degree, it's just, we're not competitive anymore. That mindset leads to is we don't compete with each other on an equal basis, and then people get weak.
Yeah.
And it's that different cultures, a man and a woman or whatever, we compete, and then the strongest person rise to the top.
Yeah.
Is that, to a certain degree, just to sum up?
You see, I think competition is very important. You can't conceive of an achieving individual without also competing. Okay, that's very important. The culture that has been developed as a result of leftist extremism is a culture in terms of which any strength, the strength of a man in various fields, be it physical strength, be it business strength, be it military strength, political strength, all that is sanctioned as being inherently bad. That is not so. That is contra-human actually to do so. It's not so. That is sound, supposed to be sound. At the same time, part and parcel of competition, part and parcel of the strong ones eventually surviving, and not only surviving, but being the winners, so to say. Apart from that, you also have the very important thing that all this within a community, within a cultural setting, within a civilizational setting, happens within accepted tenets, accepted norms that keep the community intact. So in other words, you deal with strength, you promote strength, but you see to it at the same time that strength does not descend into things like corruption, criminality, and things like that. I think that is one of the core principles, that those two things working together, that's one of the core foundations of civilization in general, and also then of Western civilization specifically.
Okay, Koos, we've covered the Paleo-Western Revolution, what led to it, its strengths, its weaknesses, the new liberal order. What would you leave our viewers with in terms of how can they prepare for this new change of arrangement, and perhaps any organizations or articles that you're planning to write or be part of or currently part of? How can they join those movements to be part of this new change or voice their opinions in this new change?
Look, this whole thing, this revolution is under operation. Okay? There's going to be a massive, and it's already underway, there's going to be a massive fight back. There's no question about that. The progressives, as also the communists, which are part of the whole progressive configuration, they will fight back. So, in other words, the fact that we had a change of government in the United States, and that you might have changes of government elsewhere in the world, in the Western world, does not mean that this is a done deal. The main victory that has to be achieved is, as I've said a couple of minutes ago, is in the field of the media, the common sense, and also in the field of education. So there's a tremendous amount of work. I can't say how tremendous actually it is for people in journalism, for people in academia, for artists, writers, musicians, and so on and so forth, to rediscover the bases of Western civilization and all the roots of Western civilization, and each and everything which could positively contribute towards enriching this Paleo-Western revolution, to actually rediscover it and to go out of our way to in all spheres, but specifically in academia, in education, and in the media, to make that part of, and that's a very important word, to make that part of the common sense. Part of the common sense should not be that you can choose your sex or your gender at will. Part of your common sense should not be that there's only the individual, but that there's also communities. So the common sense has to be changed. And all people, the intelligentsia of which we are part, will have to play in the next decades a massive role. We'll have to really weigh in order to see to it that this eventually was not only a change of government, but actually a true revolution. There's been a long grounding actually of this, of foundations that has been formed also here in South Africa. I was involved in several of these foundations, working groups, civic organizations, podcasts, and so on. All that has been part of the grounding, the preparation work, and that has been typically also of previous revolutions, be it the liberal revolution which took place in France actually, and at the same time the communist revolution and so on. And one can mention other examples. There has been a grounding, a preparation, but the main thing is we had a breakthrough. But the breakthrough is only a breakthrough. It's important, but it's only a breakthrough. And let me just lastly say, and that's perhaps not precisely in response to your question, I and you subscribe to a lot of liberal values. Freedom of expression, privacy, private economy, and so on. But let me just speak for myself. I am not a liberalist, to use that word. I know it's a little bit strange to use it. I cherish a lot of liberal values which are part and parcel of Western civilization, and that should be built into the Paleo-Western revolution that is taking place. But the ideology of liberalism, which can easily descend into what you have had in the United States and still have in the United States, and what you have in Europe, just open the borders, just not acknowledging ourselves as a specific identity, as a specific community, as a specific civilization, that can easily descend into that. So it's very important to distinguish between our freedoms, which are part and parcel of our identity and part and parcel, a prerequisite of our civilization. Distinguish between that on the one hand and a doctrinal liberalism which has descended into a progressivism on the other hand. And perhaps that's an appropriate answer to the question, to the last question that you've put, because I think that is most certainly a very important responsibility that we have to discharge in the months and years to come.